No one on Flight 217 noticed the man in the tailored black suit, until the flight attendants quietly changed their tone whenever they spoke to him. He boarded without bodyguards, without assistance, and without the usual trail of fear that followed him everywhere else. To everyone on the plane, he looked like another wealthy businessman traveling first class. But hidden behind those calm gray eyes was Adrian Moretti, the most feared mafia boss on the East Coast, a man whose name was whispered in courtrooms, police stations, and the darkest corners of organized crime. He had survived betrayals, assassination attempts, and wars between rival families, yet nothing had prepared him for the little girl who would soon sit beside him. As Adrian settled into his seat by the window, he loosened his tie and closed his eyes. He hated flying, not because he feared crashing, but because airplanes gave him too much time to think. Memories always found him in the silence above the clouds. 12 years earlier, his wife Elena had disappeared after a violent attack on one of his estates. When the smoke cleared, everyone believed she and their newborn daughter had died in the fire. Adrian searched for months, spending millions and sacrificing alliances to find them, but every lead ended the same way, with another dead end. Eventually, even the most loyal people around him begged him to stop searching. They said grief was making him weak, so he buried the pain beneath years of ruthless decisions and convinced himself there was nothing left to lose. Just as the cabin doors prepared to close, a flight attendant approached with a nervous smile. "Sir, I'm terribly sorry, but there has been a seating mix-up. Would you mind if this young passenger sat beside you?" Adrian looked up. Standing beside her was a small girl, no older than 10, carrying a faded blue backpack almost as big as she was. Her curly dark hair framed a pair of bright green eyes filled with curiosity instead of fear. She smiled politely. "Hi, mister. Is this seat taken?" Adrian stared for a second before quietly shaking his head. "Go ahead." She climbed into the seat and struggled to fasten her seatbelt. Without thinking, Adrian leaned over and clicked it into place. "There," he said. "Thanks," she replied with a grin. "Mom says I always mess that up." Adrian gave a faint nod before returning to his thoughts, expecting silence for the rest of the flight. He was wrong. Within minutes, the little girl began talking. "I'm Emma," she said cheerfully. "What's your name?" "Adrian." "Nice to meet you, Adrian." There was no fear in her voice, no hesitation. She spoke to him as though he were an ordinary stranger. It had been years since anyone had done that. "Are you traveling for work?" she asked. Adrian almost smiled. "Yes, me too, sort of." He raised an eyebrow. "Sort of? My mom got a new job in New York. She says it's our fresh start." Adrian nodded politely. "Fresh starts can be good." Emma looked out the window. Do grown-ups get scared about fresh starts too? The question caught him off guard. After a pause, he answered honestly. "Sometimes more than children do." She thought about that for a moment before whispering, "I think Mom is pretending not to be scared." Adrian glanced toward her. "Why do you think that?" "Because she smiles when I look at her, but when she thinks I'm not watching, she looks sad." The words landed harder than she could have imagined. Adrian remembered Elena doing the same thing years ago, smiling through fear so their baby would never cry. The engines roared to life as the plane began moving toward the runway. Emma reached into her backpack and pulled out a small notebook filled with colorful drawings. "Want to see?" Adrian wasn't interested in children's drawings, but something in her hopeful expression made it impossible to refuse. "Sure." She proudly flipped through page after page of houses, trees, animals, and smiling families. Then she stopped on one drawing. It showed a tall man holding a tiny baby while a woman stood beside them beneath a bright blue sky. Adrian stared at it. "Who's this?" Emma shrugged. "I don't know. I've dreamed about them since I was little. Mom says dreams are funny sometimes." Adrian looked more closely. The man in the drawing wore a silver watch on his left wrist with a distinctive square face, the exact style Adrian had worn for years before giving it away after Elena disappeared. He felt an unexpected chill run through him. "Interesting drawing," he murmured. Emma smiled. "Mom says I have a good imagination." Adrian nodded, though something deep inside him had begun to stir. Outside, dark clouds surrounded the aircraft as it climbed higher into the sky. Inside, neither of them realized that this ordinary conversation was quietly changing both of their lives forever. As the plane climbed above the clouds, the cabin lights dimmed and most passengers settled into quiet conversations or sleep. But Adrian found himself unable to look away from the little notebook resting on Emma's lap. He had spent years training himself to ignore emotions, to analyze every detail with cold precision. Yet something about that drawing kept pulling him back. It wasn't just the silver watch. It was the way the man held the baby, carefully supporting her tiny head with one hand. That had been exactly how Adrian had carried his newborn daughter, because Elena had teased him that he looked terrified of dropping her. No one else had witnessed those private moments except his wife. "Do you draw every day?" he finally asked. Emma's face lit up. "Almost every day. Mom says drawing helps me tell stories. And do you like stories?" "I love them." She leaned closer and lowered her voice as if sharing a secret. "Especially stories where people aren't who everyone thinks they are." Adrian's expression remained calm, but the words echoed in his mind. If anyone on this plane knew who he truly was, they would never be speaking to him so casually. "Why those stories?" he asked. Emma shrugged. "Because sometimes bad people can be good, and sometimes nice people lie." Adrian looked out the window. "That's surprisingly wise." She giggled. "My teacher says I ask too many questions." "Questions aren't always a bad thing. Do you have kids?" The question struck him harder than a bullet ever had. He hesitated just long enough for Emma to notice. He cleared his throat. "I had a daughter once." "Had? A long time ago." Emma's cheerful smile softened. "I'm sorry." Adrian simply nodded, unable to say anything else. Before the silence became uncomfortable, the seatbelt sign chimed as the captain announced unexpected turbulence ahead. Within seconds, the aircraft jolted sharply. Several passengers gasped while drinks rattled across tray tables. Emma grabbed the armrest tightly, trying to appear brave, but Adrian noticed her hands shaking. "It's okay," he said quietly. "Planes are built for this." Another violent drop made a few people scream. Without thinking, Emma reached for his hand. Adrian looked down at her tiny fingers wrapped around his own. He hadn't held a child's hand in 12 years. Instead of pulling away, he gently squeezed back. "See?" he said calmly. "We're going to be fine." Emma nodded, taking slow breaths exactly as he instructed. After several tense minutes, the turbulence eased and nervous laughter spread through the cabin. "You were right," Emma smiled. "I told you. You're really calm." Adrian gave a faint smile. "I've been through worse." "Like what?" He almost answered honestly, but stopped himself. "Life." She accepted the answer without pushing further. A flight attendant arrived with snacks for the passengers. Emma thanked her politely before noticing Adrian hadn't touched his food. "You're not hungry?" she asked. "Not really. My mom says people should never skip meals." Adrian chuckled quietly. "Your mom sounds very smart." "She is." Emma carefully broke her chocolate cookie in half and held one piece toward him. "Here." Adrian stared at the small piece of cookie. He owned luxury restaurants across 3 countries. He could buy anything money could purchase. Yet no one had shared food with him in years, simply because they wanted to. "Go ahead," Emma insisted. "Sharing makes everything taste better." Slowly, Adrian accepted it. "Thank you." She smiled proudly as though she had accomplished something important. He took a bite, and for reasons he couldn't explain, it tasted better than any expensive dessert he'd ever eaten. Across the aisle, a woman glanced toward them with a warm smile before returning to her book. Adrian noticed Emma watching the woman. "Friend of yours?" he asked. "No," Emma whispered. "She reminds me of my mom when she laughs." "Where is your mother sitting?" "Back in economy." Adrian frowned. "Why aren't you sitting together?" "She wanted me to have the better seat because I've never flown before. She said she'd be okay in the back." Adrian looked toward the crowded economy cabin beyond the curtain. He couldn't remember the last time someone sacrificed their own comfort so another person could have something better. It reminded him painfully of Elena, who had always put others first. "Your mother sounds like an extraordinary person," he said. Emma nodded proudly. "She works really hard." She reached into her backpack again and pulled out an old photograph with worn edges. "This is the only baby picture we have." Adrian glanced at it casually, then froze. The picture showed a young woman holding an infant wrapped in a pale blue blanket. The woman's face was partly hidden by sunlight, but around her neck hung a silver heart-shaped pendant engraved with tiny roses. Adrian's heartbeat stopped for an instant. He had designed that pendant himself and given it to Elena on the day their daughter was born. There had only ever been one made. His fingers trembled almost imperceptibly as he stared at the faded photograph, unable to look away while 1,000 impossible thoughts crashed through his mind. Adrian forced himself to breathe normally as he handed the photograph back to Emma, careful not to reveal the storm raging inside him. Years of surviving betrayals had taught him one rule above all others: never react before you know the truth. But this was different. That silver pendant had never been sold, copied, or displayed anywhere. It had been handcrafted for Elena alone, with a tiny inscription hidden inside the heart that only the jeweler, Adrian, and his wife knew existed. Coincidence suddenly felt impossible. "That's a beautiful necklace," Adrian said as casually as he could. Emma smiled. "Mom never takes it off. She says it reminds her that love can survive anything." Adrian swallowed hard. Those were almost the exact words he had whispered to Elena when he fastened the pendant around her neck in the hospital after their daughter was born. Before he could ask another question, the captain announced that the turbulence had passed and passengers were free to move around the cabin. Emma unbuckled her seatbelt. "I'm going to surprise Mom with the extra cookie I saved for her." She held up a napkin hiding the treat. "She always gives me the bigger half, so today I'm giving her mine." Adrian watched her disappear toward the economy section. Something deep inside him urged him to follow, but another part warned him not to chase ghosts. He remained seated, staring at the clouds outside the window, until he noticed something unusual. A man 3 rows ahead had stood up and quietly slipped into the aisle behind Emma. He wore a baseball cap pulled low over his face and kept glancing toward the first-class cabin instead of looking where he was walking. Adrian's instincts immediately awakened. For years, those instincts had kept him alive. He unfastened his seatbelt and rose without attracting attention. As he moved toward the rear of the aircraft, he saw the man stop beside Emma, who had reached her mother's row. The stranger smiled, but there was something unnatural about it. "Hello there," the man said. "Are you traveling alone?" Emma shook her head. "No, my mom is right here." A tired-looking woman by the window looked up protectively. "Can I help you?" she asked. The man hesitated before mumbling an apology and continuing down the aisle toward the restroom. Adrian kept watching until the restroom door closed behind him. Only then did he approach. "Everything all right?" he asked. Emma beamed. "Hi, Adrian." Her mother looked up with grateful eyes. "Thank you for keeping her company. She can talk anyone's ears off." Adrian smiled politely, then finally looked directly at the woman's face. Time seemed to stop. She wasn't Elena. For a brief second, disappointment crashed into him with such force that he almost felt dizzy. The woman had different eyes, different hair, a different smile. Yet around her neck hung the unmistakable silver heart pendant. She noticed Adrian looking at it and instinctively touched it with her fingers. "It's been in my family for years," she said softly. "At least, that's what I was told." Adrian nodded slowly. "It's very unique. My name is Sarah," she added, "and thank you again for being kind to Emma." "It was my pleasure." Before Adrian could ask another question, the restroom door opened. The man in the baseball cap stepped out, glanced directly at Adrian, then immediately turned away. For the smallest fraction of a second, their eyes met. Adrian recognized the look instantly. It was the look of someone identifying a target. The stranger wasn't interested in Emma. He was watching Adrian. Within moments, the man hurried back to his seat, pretending nothing had happened. Adrian returned to first class, but his mind was already calculating possibilities. He discreetly removed a secure satellite phone from his briefcase and typed a single encrypted message to his most trusted security chief. Verify passenger manifest immediately. Mail. Baseball cap. Row 23. No mistakes. Seconds later, the reply appeared. Working. 3 minutes passed. Then another message arrived. Boss, you need to stay calm. The passenger you identified boarded using a stolen identity. No confirmed records exist under that name. Adrian's expression hardened. He looked toward the rear of the aircraft just as the stranger briefly lifted his sleeve to check his watch. Tattooed on his wrist was the symbol of the Romano Syndicate, the same rival family Adrian had nearly destroyed 6 months earlier. They had somehow found him. At that exact moment, Emma skipped happily back toward first class, completely unaware that she was walking straight between the most dangerous man in America and an assassin sent to kill him 30,000 feet above the Atlantic. Emma happily returned to her seat beside Adrian, completely unaware of the danger surrounding her. She placed her backpack beneath the seat and smiled. Mom loved the cookie. She said I made her day. Adrian nodded, but his attention never drifted far from the man in row 23. Years of experience had taught him that assassins rarely worked alone. If one was on board, there was a good chance another was somewhere nearby. He casually scanned the cabin, memorizing every face, every movement, every unusual glance. Across the aisle, a businessman folded his newspaper. An elderly couple slept peacefully. A young mother rocked her crying baby. Everything looked normal, yet Adrian knew appearances could be deadly. His secure phone vibrated again. New message. 2 additional suspects identified. Possible coordinated operation. Avoid confrontation until landing. Adrian locked the screen without replying. Avoiding confrontation was no longer an option. Emma was sitting beside him, and innocent passengers filled every seat. If violence broke out inside the aircraft, dozens of lives could be lost. Are you okay? Emma asked, noticing the tension in his face. Adrian forced a small smile. Just thinking about work. Mom says people work too much. Your mom might be right. Emma giggled before opening her notebook again. Can I draw you? Adrian blinked in surprise. Me? You have one of those faces that looks serious but kind at the same time. No one had ever described him that way. To the world, he was feared. To his enemies, he was ruthless. Kind was the last word anyone would have used. If you want, he replied. Emma carefully began sketching while Adrian watched the cabin through the reflection in the window. A few minutes later, the man with the baseball cap stood again. This time he wasn't alone. Another passenger, dressed as an ordinary tourist, rose from a different row and slowly made his way toward the front lavatory. Their timing was too perfect to be accidental. Adrian quietly leaned toward Emma. I need you to do something for me. Okay. Keep drawing. No matter what happens, don't stand up unless I tell you. She looked confused but nodded. Promise? Promise. Adrian loosened his seatbelt without making a sound. The first assassin reached the front galley just as the second paused near the cockpit door. Their eyes met briefly in silent communication. Then everything happened at once. The man nearest the cockpit slipped his hand inside his jacket. Before he could pull anything out, Adrian was already moving. He crossed the aisle in 2 quick steps and slammed the man's wrist against the cabin wall. A metallic object clattered onto the floor. A syringe. The passengers gasped. The second assassin lunged forward, but Adrian drove his shoulder into the man's chest, sending him crashing into an empty service cart. Flight attendants screamed as trays scattered across the floor. Stay seated, Adrian shouted. His commanding voice froze the cabin. The first attacker struggled free and swung a heavy punch, but Adrian blocked it effortlessly. Years of combat training took over. Within seconds, he twisted the man's arm behind his back and forced him to the ground. The second attacker reached into his pocket, but before he could react, 2 off-duty federal air marshals who had been quietly observing the disturbance rushed forward. Together, they restrained both men. One marshal looked at Adrian in astonishment. Who are you? Adrian simply replied, "Someone who doesn't like innocent people getting hurt." Emma stared wide-eyed from her seat. Instead of looking frightened, she looked amazed. "You moved like a superhero," she whispered when Adrian returned. He couldn't help smiling. "I'm definitely not a superhero." The captain announced that the situation had been contained and that the aircraft would make a priority landing. Nervous applause spread through the cabin as passengers realized they were safe. Sarah hurried forward from economy and wrapped Emma tightly in her arms. "Are you all right?" she asked, tears filling her eyes. "I'm fine, Mom." Adrian protected everyone. Sarah turned toward Adrian with overwhelming gratitude. "I don't even know how to thank you." "You don't have to." Just then, one of the restrained assassins began laughing. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth as he looked directly at Adrian. "You still don't know, do you?" he sneered. Adrian's eyes narrowed. "Know what?" The assassin smiled, despite the officers holding him down. "The girl isn't a coincidence. We've been watching her for years, waiting for the day she'd lead us back to you." Every sound inside the cabin seemed to disappear. Adrian slowly turned toward Emma, whose confused green eyes met his own. For the first time since boarding the plane, he noticed the tiny crescent-shaped birthmark just behind her left ear. The exact birthmark his newborn daughter had carried the night she was born. Adrian felt the world tilt beneath him as his eyes remained fixed on the tiny crescent-shaped birthmark behind Emma's ear. It was small, almost impossible to notice, unless her hair shifted in exactly the right way, but he had memorized every detail of his daughter's face the day she was born. Elena had laughed when the doctor pointed it out, calling it their little moon. Adrian had kissed that tiny mark before promising he would always protect her. 12 years later, he was staring at the same mark on the little girl sitting only inches away. His heart pounded harder than it ever had during any gunfight. "Boss!" One of the federal air marshals shouted as the assassin struggled against his restraints, but Adrian barely heard him. Emma looked from Adrian to the handcuffed men with growing confusion. "Why is everyone looking at me?" she whispered. Sarah wrapped an arm around her daughter. "It's okay, sweetheart. Everything's going to be all right." The assassin laughed again. "Tell him the truth, Sarah." The woman's face turned pale. She instinctively stepped back, shielding Emma behind her. Adrian's voice remained calm, but there was an intensity in it that silenced everyone nearby. "How does he know you?" Sarah swallowed hard. I don't know." "Don't lie," the assassin snapped. "You stole what our family spent years searching for." One of the air marshals struck the man's shoulder, forcing him back into his seat, but the damage had already been done. Every word had landed like a hammer. Adrian looked directly at Sarah. "Please. I need the truth." Tears filled her eyes. For several long seconds, she said nothing. Then she slowly reached beneath her blouse and held the silver heart pendant in her trembling hand. "I never stole her," she whispered. Adrian remained silent. 12 years ago, I was working as a volunteer nurse after the fire at your estate. I found a woman barely alive in the woods. She was holding a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. Before she lost consciousness, she begged me to save her daughter. She said people would keep hunting the child if they knew who she was. Adrian's breathing became unsteady. "Elena." Sarah nodded through tears. "She never told me your name. She only kept saying, 'Protect my little girl. Promise me she'll have a chance to live a normal life.'" Emma stared at both adults, completely lost. "Mom, what are they talking about?" Sarah knelt beside her and gently held her hands. "Sweetheart, there's something I've wanted to tell you for a very long time." Her voice broke. "I'm not the woman who gave birth to you." Emma's eyes widened. "What?" "But I have loved you every single day since I found you. Nothing will ever change that." Tears rolled down Emma's cheeks as she tried to understand. She looked toward Adrian, then back at Sarah. "You're still my mom." Sarah pulled her into a tight embrace, crying openly. Adrian turned away for a moment, overwhelmed by emotions he had buried for over a decade. The secure phone in his pocket vibrated once more. He ignored it. Nothing in his criminal empire mattered compared to what was happening in front of him. Finally, he looked back at Emma. She hesitated before asking the question that made the entire cabin fall silent. Are? Are you my real dad? Adrian opened his mouth, but no words came. His eyes filled with tears for the first time since the night he believed he had lost his family. Slowly, he knelt in front of her so they were at the same height. I don't know for certain yet, he answered honestly, but I know one thing. Emma waited quietly. Adrian gently brushed a strand of hair away from the little birthmark behind her ear. His hand trembled. The moment I met you, something in my heart felt like it had finally come home. Emma looked into his eyes for several seconds before wrapping her small arms around him, without saying a word. Adrian froze. Then, with tears streaming down his face, he carefully hugged her back, afraid that if he held on too tightly, the moment might disappear like every dream he had carried for the last 12 years. Across the cabin, even strangers wiped away tears, while the captured assassin watched with hatred burning in his eyes. He leaned toward one of the officers and whispered just loudly enough for Adrian to hear. Enjoy your reunion while it lasts, because your wife is still alive, and my boss already knows you've found the girl. The assassin's words struck Adrian harder than any weapon ever could. Your wife is still alive. For a heartbeat, he couldn't move. He searched the man's face for any sign of deception, but all he found was a cruel smile. The federal air marshal immediately pulled the assassin away, yet the sentence continued echoing through Adrian's mind. Elena alive? After 12 years? It sounded impossible, but so had finding Emma on an ordinary flight. Adrian slowly stood, his arms still protectively around Emma. She looked up at him with frightened eyes. Is something bad going to happen? She asked softly. Adrian forced himself to smile despite the storm inside him. Not while I'm here. Sarah wiped away her tears and stepped closer. If those men know about Emma, then she's in danger, isn't she? Adrian didn't answer immediately. He knew the truth all too well. The Romano syndicate never abandoned unfinished business. If they had spent years searching for Emma, this flight had only been the beginning. His secure phone vibrated again. This time, he answered. Talk. His security chief's voice came through immediately. Boss, we've intercepted communications from the Romano network. The attack on the plane failed, but another team is already moving toward Kennedy Airport. They're expecting your aircraft to land there. Adrian's expression hardened. How many? At least 12 confirmed. Possibly more. Clear the airport? Federal authorities are already responding, but we can't guarantee they'll reach every exit in time. Adrian ended the call and looked toward the windows as the aircraft began its descent through thick clouds. The lights of New York slowly appeared beneath them, like a sea of stars. Every second brought them closer to another battle. Emma gently tugged on his sleeve. Are you leaving after we land? The innocent question caught him off guard. Before today, he would have walked away without hesitation. Now the thought of leaving her felt impossible. No, he answered quietly. I'm staying with you. Emma smiled with visible relief and reached for his hand again. Adrian squeezed it gently. Sarah watched the moment unfold, her eyes filled with both gratitude and worry. She deserves the truth, Sarah whispered. I know, Adrian replied, but she also deserves a childhood that wasn't stolen by my world. Sarah nodded. That's why Elena begged me to disappear. Adrian looked at her sharply. She told you that? Before she lost consciousness. She believed powerful people would never stop hunting your family. Adrian closed his eyes for a moment. That sounded exactly like Elena. She would have sacrificed everything if it meant protecting their daughter. Suddenly, Emma reached into her backpack. I almost forgot. She carefully pulled out a folded piece of paper that looked much older than the rest of her drawings. Mom said I should never lose this. Sarah's face changed instantly. Emma, it's okay, the little girl said. Maybe he should see it. She handed the paper to Adrian. The edges were faded and worn, as though it had been opened countless times over the years. His fingers trembled as he unfolded it. Inside was a short handwritten note. He recognized the elegant handwriting immediately. Elena's. Every letter, Every curve of the ink was unmistakable. The note read, "If our daughter ever finds her father, tell him I never stopped believing he would come for us. The stars always lead home. Elena." Adrian stared at the words as tears blurred his vision. He remembered saying those exact words to Elena during their first date beneath a sky full of stars. The stars always lead home. No one else knew that phrase. No one. Emma looked up at him. "Did you know the person who wrote it?" Adrian could barely speak. "Yes." His voice cracked. "She was the bravest person I've ever known." The captain announced that the aircraft had received priority clearance and would be landing in less than 5 minutes. Passengers began preparing for arrival, unaware that dozens of armed officers were already surrounding the runway below. Adrian carefully folded Elena's letter and slipped it into his jacket pocket, as though it were the most valuable thing he had ever owned. Then he looked at Emma. "When those doors open, stay beside me no matter what happens." She nodded. "I trust you." Those 3 simple words meant more to Adrian than all the power and wealth he had built over the last 12 years. But as the plane's wheels touched the runway, another encrypted message flashed across his phone from an unknown number. It contained only a recent photograph. Elena was alive. She was sitting in a dimly lit room, looking directly at the camera. Across the bottom of the image were 6 chilling words. Asterisk. "Welcome back to the real game." The moment the aircraft rolled to a stop, Adrian's instincts took over. He slipped his phone into his jacket before Emma or Sarah could see the photograph. Panic would only make the situation worse. Outside the windows, flashing blue and red lights surrounded the plane. Police vehicles, armored SUVs, and emergency crews raced across the tarmac, but Adrian knew appearances could be deceiving. The Romano Syndicate had infiltrated law enforcement before. Uniforms alone meant nothing. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain announced, "for your safety, please remain seated until authorities board the aircraft." Nervous whispers filled the cabin. Emma tightened her grip on Adrian's hand. "I've never seen so many police cars," she whispered. Adrian gave her a reassuring smile. "They're here to keep everyone safe." Seconds later, the aircraft door opened. Armed federal agents entered first, followed by airport security officers. The air marshals immediately handed over the captured assassins. As the men were escorted away, the one with the baseball cap turned his head toward Adrian and laughed one last time. "Tick, tock, boss." Adrian didn't respond. He simply watched until the assassin disappeared through the aircraft door. A senior federal agent approached. "Mr. Moretti, we'd like to ask you a few questions." Adrian nodded. "After these 2 are somewhere secure." He looked toward Emma and Sarah. "They stay with me." The agent hesitated before agreeing. The passengers slowly exited the plane under heavy security. Many paused to thank Adrian, shaking his hand or simply offering grateful smiles. An elderly woman hugged Emma and whispered, "Your friend is a very brave man." Emma proudly replied, "I know." As they stepped into the terminal, Adrian immediately noticed something wrong. The arrival hall looked almost empty. For one of the busiest airports in the country, the silence felt unnatural. His phone vibrated once. His security chief had sent only 2 words. Asterisk, "It's happening." Adrian's eyes narrowed. "Everyone down," he shouted. Before anyone understood why, the massive glass wall at the end of the terminal exploded inward. The deafening crash sent hundreds of shards flying across the floor as masked gunmen rushed inside. Passengers screamed and dropped to the ground. Federal agents returned fire while smoke filled the terminal. Adrian instantly pulled Emma and Sarah behind a thick concrete support column. "Stay here," he ordered. Emma buried her face against his shoulder, trembling. "I'm scared." Adrian gently placed a hand on her head. "I know. Just keep your eyes closed." More gunfire echoed through the building. The attackers weren't firing wildly. They were advancing with military precision, ignoring everyone except Adrian's position. They hadn't come for money. They hadn't come for revenge alone. They had come for him and for Emma. One masked attacker shouted, "Take the girl alive!" Adrian's expression turned icy. In that single moment, every doubt vanished. Whether DNA confirmed it or not, Emma was his daughter in every way that mattered. No one was taking her. He removed a small pistol from the hidden holster beneath his jacket, something he hoped he would never need on this trip. Sarah stared at him in shock but said nothing. Adrian handed her his phone. "If anything happens to me, press the red button. It connects directly to my people." Sarah shook her head. "Nothing is happening to you." Adrian looked into her eyes. "Protect her." Before she could answer, he stepped out from behind the column. His voice thundered across the terminal. "You want someone?" Every masked gunman turned toward him. Adrian slowly raised his hands away from the weapon hidden beneath his jacket. "I'm right here." The attackers shifted their attention completely onto him. It was exactly what he wanted. As they advanced, Adrian calmly counted each step they took, waiting for the perfect moment. Then a familiar female voice echoed through the terminal's loudspeaker system. "Stop shooting!" Everyone froze. The voice continued, calm and unmistakable. "If Adrian Moretti dies today, none of you will ever see your families again." Adrian's heart nearly stopped. He knew that voice better than his own. It was Elena. She was alive, and somehow she was inside the airport. Every sound inside the terminal seemed to vanish as Adrian stared toward the ceiling speakers. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. 12 years of grief, regret, and unanswered questions came crashing down in a single instant. It was Elena's voice. Not a recording from the past, not a memory. It was her. The masked gunmen stopped advancing and exchanged uncertain glances. Even they hadn't expected the interruption. A moment later, every digital advertising screen throughout the terminal flickered, went black, and then displayed a live video feed. A woman appeared, seated in a dimly lit room. Her dark hair was shorter than Adrian remembered, and faint scars marked one side of her face, but her eyes were exactly the same. Adrian felt the air leave his lungs. "Elena," he whispered. On the screen, she looked directly into the camera. "Adrian," she said softly, "if you're seeing this, then you've found our daughter." Tears filled Adrian's eyes. Emma looked from the screen to Adrian with growing disbelief. That's the lady from the note," she whispered. Sarah placed a comforting hand on Emma's shoulder, but could not hide her own shock. Elena continued speaking. "I prayed every day that this moment would come, but not like this. Listen carefully, because we don't have much time." Behind her stood 2 armed men. They weren't pointing weapons at her, but their presence said enough. She was not free. The Romano syndicate kept me alive because they believed I knew where Emma was. I never told them. Sarah kept her promise. She gave our little girl the life we wanted her to have. Sarah covered her mouth as tears streamed down her cheeks. Adrian's fists clenched. "Where are you?" he demanded, though he knew she couldn't hear him. Elena continued, "If you're watching this, they've probably forced this broadcast. They think they'll break you by making you choose between me and Emma." One of the masked attackers suddenly shouted toward Adrian. "Throw down your weapon." Adrian ignored him, unable to look away from the screen. Elena's expression changed. Even through the camera, she somehow looked straight into his soul. "Don't make the choice they expect. Protect our daughter first. Promise me." Adrian nodded instinctively, whispering, "I promise." Emma tugged gently at his sleeve. Is she really my mother?" Adrian slowly looked down at her. His voice trembled. "Yes." Emma stared at the screen with tears in her bright green eyes. "She looks like me." Adrian smiled through his own tears. "You have her smile." Before anyone could say another word, the video suddenly glitched. The image froze for a split second before another face appeared. A man in an expensive charcoal suit stepped into view. His silver hair was perfectly combed, and his cold blue eyes held no emotion. Adrian recognized him instantly. Victor Romano. The man everyone believed had died 5 years earlier. The true head of the Romano syndicate had been alive all along. Victor smiled calmly. "Good evening, Adrian. It's been far too long." The entire terminal remained frozen as his voice echoed from every speaker. "You've spent 12 years mourning your family, while I spent 12 years building the perfect trap." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Let them go." Victor laughed quietly. You still think this is about revenge. It isn't. It's about legacy. He rested a hand on Elena's shoulder. She refused to look at him. Your daughter has inherited something far more valuable than your empire. Something men have killed for over generations. Adrian frowned. What are you talking about? Victor smiled even wider. You honestly don't know. For the first time, Victor seemed genuinely amused. Then your father kept the secret from you as well. Adrian's mind raced. His father had hidden many things, but never anything involving Elena or their child. Victor leaned closer to the camera. Your daughter isn't valuable because she's your heir. She's valuable because she is the last living key to the Black Ledger. A wave of confusion crossed Adrian's face. He had heard whispers about the Black Ledger since he was a boy, a legendary record said to contain the names, fortunes, and crimes of the most powerful criminal organizations in the world. Most believed it was only a myth. Victor's smile faded. Find the ledger before I do, Adrian, or your reunion with Elena will become your final goodbye. The broadcast abruptly cut to black. At that exact moment, every light inside the terminal went out, plunging the building into complete darkness as terrified screams echoed through the airport. Darkness swallowed the terminal, and terrified screams echoed from every direction. Emma instinctively grabbed Adrian's hand, while Sarah wrapped both arms around her. For a few endless seconds, no one could see anything except the flashing emergency exit signs, glowing faintly in the distance. Then the backup generators roared to life. Dim emergency lights illuminated the terminal in a pale red glow. Adrian immediately looked toward the giant screens. Victor Romano and Elena were gone. The broadcast had ended, but the gunmen who had stormed the airport were no longer moving. One by one, they slowly lowered their weapons. A voice came through their earpieces, and without firing another shot, they turned and disappeared through the shattered exits into the night. Federal agents cautiously secured the building, while medical teams rushed to frighten passengers. Everyone was confused. The battle had ended as suddenly as it had begun. Adrian knew why. Victor had never intended to win that fight. He had wanted Adrian to know the truth and to begin searching. An FBI commander approached Adrian. Mr. Moretti, we've secured the terminal. Your family is safe. Adrian looked down at Emma. Family. The word felt unfamiliar, yet perfectly right. Emma looked up at him with hopeful eyes. Are you really staying? Adrian knelt in front of her and gently held both of her hands. If you'll let me, I'd like to spend the rest of my life making up for every birthday, every bedtime story, and every hug we lost. Tears rolled down Emma's cheeks as she smiled. You don't have to make them up all at once. Adrian laughed softly through his tears. That's true. She threw her arms around him, and this time he hugged her without fear, holding his daughter close after believing for 12 long years that she was gone forever. Sarah stood beside them, quietly wiping away tears. Adrian looked at her with deep gratitude. You gave her the childhood Elena wanted her to have. Sarah shook her head. I only kept a promise. Adrian stepped forward and embraced her. You didn't just keep a promise. You became her mother when she needed one most. Nothing will ever change that. Emma reached for Sarah's hand with one hand and Adrian's with the other. Then we're all family. Neither adult could argue with that. Days later, DNA results confirmed what Adrian's heart had known from the moment he saw the tiny crescent-shaped birthmark behind Emma's ear. She was his daughter. News of the reunion spread across the world, but Adrian ignored every reporter waiting outside his estate. For the first time in his life, power, money, and reputation meant nothing. Every morning he made Emma breakfast, walked her through the gardens, listened to her stories, and proudly displayed every drawing she made. The cold mansion that had once echoed with silence slowly filled with laughter. One afternoon, Emma handed Adrian a fresh drawing. It showed 3 people standing beneath a sky full of stars, a father, a mother, and a daughter holding hands. We'll find Mom, Emma said confidently. Adrian smiled and kissed the top of her head. Yes, he whispered, we will. 6 months later, after an international operation involving law enforcement from several countries, Victor Romano's criminal network was dismantled. Hidden evidence led investigators to the remote estate where Elena had been held. When the rescue team opened the final steel door, Adrian was the first person she saw. Neither of them spoke. They simply ran toward each other and embraced as years of heartbreak disappeared into tears of relief. Emma joined them moments later, wrapping her arms around both of her parents. The three stood together, unwilling to let go. The family that had been torn apart by violence was finally whole again. Years passed, and Adrian left the criminal empire behind forever. He used his fortune to help children who had lost their families to violence, believing every child deserved the chance Emma had been given. On clear evenings, the three of them would sit outside beneath the stars. Emma would always point to the brightest one and smile. Adrian would smile back, remembering the promise he had once made to Elena. The stars always lead home, and after 12 years of searching through darkness, they finally had. Like, subscribe, and support my channel. I really need your support. If you enjoy my video, please share it and leave your feedback in the comments.